There are many kinds of conflicts and disputes, and they are not all best resolved in the same way. Put yourself in the shoes of a manager who believes that a dispute is preventing two coworkers from working together effectively. What do? You could encourage them to get along, lock them in a room until they work out their differences, threaten them with consequences if their work doesn't improve, reassign one of them, or extend a deadline to give them more time. But here's an important complication. Each of these possible solutions will only work if it matches the actual source of the dispute. So any particular conflict requires a custom-made approach to resolving it. Before jumping to a preferred intervention, we need to explicitly identify the sources of a particular dispute and then design a dispute resolution intervention to match these sources. A conflict is some kind of opposition between two or more parties. This can be caused by many possible sources that fall into three broad categories: structure, cognition, and disposition. Structure refers to the nature of the relationship between the parties involved. No, not that kind of structure. A focus on patterns of authority, interconnections, and context. What are the interests or goals, rights, and sources of power? Are there rules that govern their relationship? What's the nature of their interdependency? One possibility is that the relationship is characterized by autonomous agents pursuing their self-interest in relationships that are relatively easy to begin and end. These relationships don't need to endure if it's not in everyone's best interest to keep it going. Three other possibilities all involve relationships that are expected to be more enduring, but these differ by the nature of the interdependency. A relationship could involve strongly interdependent interests in which a long-term partnership provides the greatest returns to both sides when structured appropriately. Or a relationship characterized by sharply antagonistic conflicts of interest, such as conflicts over scarce resources. The first might be win-win, the second win-lose. It's also possible to have a mixture of these two, that is, a long-term relationship in which some of the interests can be aligned and some are opposed to each other. So the relationship is often about finding a balance. Cognitive sources of conflict relate to mental functioning. This is a broad category that includes a variety of ways in which cognition may cause or contribute to a dispute. For starters, our own unique personal history of experiences and culture creates a cognitive frame that our brain uses to interpret and give meaning to new things we see, read, hear, and experience. So different frames can cause conflict as individuals interpret things differently. Frames can also shape personal preferences or opinions that can clash with another's. Moreover, we have limited cognitive capacity, so our decision-making is often impacted by cognitive biases that can cause conflict. We also tend to identify with certain groups and to feel good about ourselves. We embrace the positive aspects of our own in-groups and focus on the negative aspects of the corresponding out-groups. This can cause conflict among individuals with different identities through stereotyping, prejudice, stigmatizing, implicit biases, and assumptions of resource competition and identity threats. Lastly, communication is a cognitive activity that can lead to a conflict when it breaks down. Disposition captures the sources of conflict arising from the psychology of feelings. This has two main subdimensions. First, emotions and moods can cause conflict through the behaviors they create or by influencing decision-making. For example, anger, frustration, contempt, jealousy, and other hot emotions can lead to aggressive communication behaviors while lessening constructive communication. The recipient of negative emotions often tries to counter this by lashing out, which distracts them away from processing information and making sound decisions. Second, personality differences can also cause or contribute to disputes. This is not to say that every dispute involves all of these sources. Rather, the goal here is to provide a broad list of possibilities to look for so that you don't miss any. This is also a reminder that conflicts can have more than one source, so we shouldn't just stop when we identify one cause. The sources of conflict can also evolve over time, so it's important to be mindful of the possibilities. Turning to the resolution of a dispute, there are several different methods for resolving conflict: rules, negotiation, which can take many forms, and third-party methods. As the name suggests, third-party methods involve the assistance of someone who is not a direct party to the dispute. Some third-party methods might facilitate a resolution, mediation is a key example, while others might impose a resolution. Arbitration is a key example, but others such as judges or a manager could also impose a resolution. So what approach or approaches to use for a particular conflict? For this, we turn our attention back to the underlying sources. That is, the dispute resolution method needs to match the conflict sources. We call this managing conflict at its sources. Resolving structural conflicts requires diagnosing whether a particular conflict is best characterized by the egoist, unitarist, pluralist, or antagonistic mindsets. This can help focus attention on the key aspects of the relationship. Recognizing alternative structural forms of conflict is also important for evaluating power and for assessing the effectiveness of third-party interventions. In an egoist relationship, power is less important than self-interest. If someone gives you a good deal, take it. If not, take your next best alternative. Don't get overly distracted by trying to win. In a unitarist relationship, conflict may stem from failing to recognize the mutual nature of the relationship, and a focus on power likely interferes with finding interest-aligning policies. Also, the importance of mutuality means that adversarial negotiations or the arbitration of conflicts could be counterproductive. Rather, mediation-type interventions are most useful in helping the parties recognize their mutual interests and resolve any coordination problems or barriers to achieving the integrative potential inherent in their relationship. In a pluralist relationship, adversarial and win-win negotiations are both likely, and the parties or third-party dispute resolution actors would likely need to ensure that power is not exercised in an overly aggressive way that undermines the shared interests and enduring nature of the relationship. In other words, seeking a balance can often be useful so that neither side dominates and threatens the viability of the relationship. In contrast, power differences are likely a significant aspect of an antagonistic relationship, and adversarial negotiations would be fully consistent in this structure. But in antagonistic relationships, mediation efforts that search for common interests are incompatible with the fundamental opposition of interests that drive conflict in this structural form, and thus would likely be pointless or could hide the true imbalance from the weaker side. These are just some of the issues to look for with different relationship types, but note that there is not a one-size-fits-all strategy. Turning to the cognitive dimension, there are various techniques to address perceptual differences rooted in contrasting cognitive frames, such as a process of unfreezing, changing, and refreezing frames, either with or without mediator assistance. Other interventions can explicitly address in-group versus out-group tensions, including cultural differences. Providing individuals training in decision-making biases and teaching them critical thinking and self-awareness can help them become aware of decision-making blind spots to work through this type of cognitive conflict. Similarly, recognizing when miscommunication causes or contributes to a conflict also points to specific conflict resolution strategies. This can include avoiding communication channels with low signal-to-noise ratios, listening for the intended meaning of what's being said, communicating in ways that the listener will understand your intent and that reflects the listener's perspective, and establishing conditions under which an effective dialogue can occur. Psychogenic conflict is perhaps the most difficult type of conflict to tackle, and again requires tailored dispute resolution strategies. This aspect of conflict is not easily resolved through negotiation, nor is it likely to be truly resolved by the imposition of a solution by a third party, such as a manager or an arbitrator. Indeed, the most accessible strategy is to give people tools to work through their own emotions or to control their moods. When dealing with hot emotions, try using cooling strategies such as taking a time out or a break, and also trying to reorient an individual's attention to be more reflective. If hot emotions like anger or humiliation are contributing to a conflict, then facilitators can lessen these emotions by acknowledging them. An understanding of how different personality types approach not only conflict, but feeling, thinking, and behavior more generally can also be useful to understand how to engage with others constructively. In closing, disputes can be multifaceted with numerous causes that interact in complex ways. By diagnosing the separate pieces of a potentially complex puzzle, those involved in a conflict will be better equipped to create lasting resolutions.